Yeah, welcome in. Welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Got a pretty interesting show for you here today. Gonna probably piss some people off, maybe piss off a lot of people with this one, but really not worried about that because I'm trying to get some legitimate basketball discourse going. And I'm gonna talk about the fact that while we often overlook him, Tim Duncan is a lot closer to LeBron than we may think, and he may actually be better. But before we get to that, you know what time it is. If you're here on YouTube and you haven't already, please make sure you go ahead, click that like, that subscribe, that notification bell. Make sure you're kept up to date whenever we drop new content on the channel. If you want the audio-only version of the podcast, open up your audio podcast platform, hit the search bar, type in The Format Podcast, and we should come right up. If you're enjoying the content, make sure you give us that like, that 5-star review, and drop a comment. All that stuff helps us rise in the algorithm, helps us find more sports fans, helps more sports fans find us. And finally, make sure you write it down, put it in your phone, set an alarm, do whatever you got to do to remember. Saturday nights at 7 p.m. we are live here on the Format Podcast, and we'll give you the opportunity to call in, talk to us, get at me. I love it. I can't wait. All right, so like I said in the intro, this is probably a show that's going to get on some people's nerves, but again, really don't care because I'm not here to push a particular narrative, despite what some of you may think. I'm here to talk hoops or talk sports and try to be objective doing it. And so a while back, I did a show talking about LeBron James being disingenuous, and one of the things I discussed on that was him saying how he is considering whether or not he wants to do he would actually want to do a walk away quietly like Tim Duncan at the end of his career, or if he wants to do the farewell tour like Kobe and Kareem and those guys. And my whole thing was, you know, it's disingenuous of LeBron based on what we've seen from the last 20 years of his career for us to actually believe that he'd be willing to do a walk away. I mean, that's just not his style. But this is not about that, right? I'm not here trying to take shots at LeBron. What I am trying to do is have a legitimate discussion about the fact that the more I've been thinking about it, the more I realized people seem to have this huge gap between Tim Duncan and LeBron. Many people have LeBron as the greatest player of all time. Some people have him as number 2. A lot of people have him as top 5. And I think it's worthy of discussion whether or not Tim Duncan is actually better than LeBron James. And on this episode, we're going to get into it and talk about that. So the first thing I got to say is, again, LeBron James has had one of the most incredible careers that we could imagine from an NBA player, right? His career has been, just absolutely amazing. And we can say that with all honesty. We see where he is on the assist list, I think number 4 all time. We see where he is on the scoring list, obviously number 1 all time, and the only player ever to score 40,000 points. Tremendous achievement. I think he's top 5 all time in scoring average, about 27 per game. And, still having a tremendous impact on the game, even in his 21st season. We see how he's been able to take care of his body and just continue to do his thing, right? And so we know about all that. And so I'm not really going to get into breaking down all of LeBron's bona fides. We know that the list is extremely long, and again, incredible career. But I want to take some more time today to talk about Tim Duncan. And when you think about it, I think so much of why he doesn't get a lot more due is probably because of how he is as a person, in terms of kind of being very private, being very quiet, not at all seeking the spotlight, just being out there trying to win. And, people have different personalities, right? LeBron has one personality, Jordan has one personality, Magic, Bird, Duncan, right? Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe. All these guys have different personalities. And so that can affect how we perceive them as players. And when you're a guy who's now looking for the spotlight, so to speak, it definitely is going to affect you. What's the old saying? The squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? And so a guy like LeBron, who I guess through no fault of his own, early on got all this attention, whether it was Sports Illustrated or ESPN or whoever, but then, clearly came to crave it as his career went on and continued to monetize said attention and really take advantage of every bit of it. He seems to have a need to be in the spotlight. Tim Duncan didn't care about that. All he cared about was winning, right? And he did that at an extremely high level. So we look at Tim Duncan and we say, some of the first things we talk about, obviously 5-time champion, possibly a 6-time champion if Ray Allen doesn't make arguably the greatest clutch shot in NBA history, right? He's a 3-time Finals MVP. Only Michael Jordan and LeBron James have more. Obviously, Michael Jordan with 6 times Finals MVP and LeBron James 4 times Finals MVP. He's a 2-time regular season MVP. He's a 15-time All-Star, which is 3rd all-time. He's a 13-time All-NBA player and a 15-time All-NBA defender, which is the most ever. And I think that's one of the biggest things when it comes to Tim Duncan is 15 times All-NBA defense, and I think he played 18 seasons. So that says that he never loafed on the opposite side of the ball, even as he aged. And then we're going to talk about how he was as he got older as this video goes on. And so you look at just those things right there, those accolades that Tim Duncan has. And again, there was never, and this is the thing, and it's not all LeBron's fault. Obviously, again, he looks for the attention, but also the media looks for him to give it to him, right? The media didn't look for Tim Duncan because Tim Duncan was often nowhere to be found. And so a lot of times we don't even talk about him the way we should. And I'm probably going to have to reassess my own top 10 because I have Tim Duncan somewhere around 8. And maybe he should be higher. I'm going to have to go back and look at that and do some reassessment. But regardless, incredible all-time player. So let's look at some other key stats from Tim Duncan here. In the regular season, he's obviously, you see it here, 16th in points, 6th in rebounds, 5th in blocks. Now the assists and the steals, those weren't his game, obviously at the power forward position, which, quick side note, makes Olajuwon all the more incredible with his being top 10 in steals. But then you see in the playoffs, he's even better, 6th in points, 3rd in rebounds, 1st in blocks. And, you see over a 19-year career, the 5 championships. Now, some people are going to knock him because I don't think the Spurs ever won back-to-back championships, but the sustained excellence over a 19-year period is astounding, right? And to kind of put some context to that, we talk about the New England Patriots in the NFL, a league where it's so hard to consistently win, winning 6 championships in 20 years and going to 9 Super Bowls as being arguably the greatest franchise ever and the greatest stretch of excellence that we've ever seen, right? But we look at Tim Duncan and the Spurs, and over his 19-year career, the San Antonio Spurs had a 71% win percentage. Incredible. And what is that? That is the best 19-year stretch of winning percentage and I guess success overall in the history of the NBA, but not just the NBA. It is the best 19-year stretch of success in the history of North American professional team sports. That says a lot, especially when you got teams like the Celtics who won, 11 titles in 13 years. And then going on from there, they won another couple of titles in the 70s. So they were great for a very long time. From 1956 to about 1976, they were winning championships consistently. And they didn't have that span of dominance. The New England Patriots, again, 6 championships in the NFL, extremely hard to do in a 20-year stretch, 9 Super Bowl appearances. But they didn't have that stretch of winning percentage of 71%, probably up around there, pretty close, but they didn't have that. So anyway, you look at Tim Duncan, and he was the linchpin and the leader of that. So for his first 10 years, I believe he averaged 21 and 11. Which, okay, the numbers aren't going to blow you away in terms of scoring. But the crazy part is, and I was doing some research and found these numbers, the crazy part of that is in that 10-year stretch, the Spurs were never in the top half of the league in pace. So when you adjust for pace of that era, Tim Duncan is averaging 31 points per game, right? So he is technically dominating offensively on a team that was not dominant offensively. That was a dominant defensive team. So they were doing their thing, right? So here's another example, right? A lot of times, so often, especially in the modern game, we measure guys by stats so often, right? And I think one of the biggest things we gotta use our eye test more, man, because it's like stats are the be all end all. And I used to be a big stat guy because what do I say? Stats are the numerical representation of what actually took place in a given circumstance, right? But there's so much more context that goes into just putting stats out there because, especially in the case of LeBron for his GOAT argument, they love to throw stats, but the context doesn't happen. Anyway, we got to look at the eye test, right? Tim Duncan was a dominant player offensively. He was a dominant player defensively. He's but he's widely regarded as the greatest power forward who ever played. And, this is a guy who played in a very good maybe the best power forward era, Rasheed Wallace, and he played against Karl Malone. Now, Karl Malone was older by that time, but he played against Karl Malone. He played against Barkley. He played against Rasheed Wallace. He played against Kevin Garnett. He played against Chris Webber, Ben Wallace, all these guys, right? Antonio McDyess, Amari Stoudemire, all these guys who were elite power forwards at one time or the other, and he gave them all that work. He handed them all that work. And so we got to look at eye test instead of just saying, well, his scoring wasn't crazy or his rebounding for his career was only 10.8. Okay, that's cool. But we saw the rebounding numbers, right? Was he 6th all time in rebounds in the regular season? And I think he's, 3rd in the playoffs? I'd have to go back and check that clip. But the point is, we know that he would get busy there. So we got to look at those things. And here's another interesting thing I found. When we just look at numbers, we got to take it into context. Why? Because 10 years from now, someone is going to look at, or 20 years from now, someone's going to look at Russell Westbrook's stats and try to tell you he's better than Steph Curry. And for those of us who've seen it, we're going to say, are you insane? Yeah, Russ was crazy. But to say he was better than Steph Curry, like, that's ridiculous. Why? Because they don't have the context. They didn't see it. They also can't apply, what was going on in the way those teams played, et cetera, right? So you got to look at it that way. You have to be able to apply the context to the numbers that you're seeing. And that's real right there. And when we look at Tim Duncan with our eyes, we see the guy had an elite post-up game. We see he had an elite face-up game. We see, of course, he had the iconic bank shot, which it seemed like he never missed. Obviously, he missed them, but it seems as if he never missed it. But to me, one of the biggest things here was this. Tim Duncan was a leader, and a leader in many ways. Like, a lot of times, the mainstream sports media will tout LeBron James's leadership, but I have a problem with that, because when you look at LeBron, he can only play and win in very specific circumstances, right? And people are going to say, well, how can you say that when he won on 3 different teams? All 3 teams that he went to, he won championships. Yes, but the fact is, again, this is a guy who has orchestrated more trades than any player of his ilk in history. So he has to have very specific pieces around him to be able to win. And if he doesn't have those pieces, he's gonna blame you, he's gonna ship you out, and he's gonna replace you. Le GM, right? I've heard people call him that, and that's real talk, because that's what happens. Now you look at a guy like Duncan. He leads by example, right? He just gets out there and he does it, and he doesn't have to have the system always be all around him or go through him in order for the team to continue to have success. And that's one of the things I look at when I look at Coach Pop and I look at Tim Duncan. That team won a lot of different ways. Obviously, it won early with post play and defense and the Twin Towers, David Robinson, Tim Duncan. Then it won later with just Tim Duncan being the man. Then it won later when Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker were coming into their own. Then it won later with Manu and Tony and Kawhi Leonard, and still being an outstanding defensive team the whole time, being anchored by Tim Duncan, and then also being a team where you have a more free-flowing offense, and then embracing the three-pointer, and Tim Duncan saying, okay, this doesn't have to go through me anymore. I'm just going to continue to come out here and do my work and lead and be a part of this team, and we're going to win anyway because of what I bring to it. Now, you're also going to have the argument that a lot of LeBron fans will bring you and say, well, LeBron James, he never had a Coach Popovich. Okay, cool. But now, again, if you use your eyes and you use your brain, what was Coach Pop prior to Tim Duncan? Never won a championship, even though he had an all-time great Hall of Fame center in David Robinson, right? He never has won a championship post Tim Duncan, right? I don't think he's made the playoffs post Tim Duncan. So as great as Pop is, and I do believe he's one of the greatest coaches of all time, it is clear that Tim Duncan is the reason why Coach Pop is one of the greatest coaches of all time. Now, let's look at this too. We love the fact that, or I love the fact that, as great as Tim Duncan was, and all great athletes have some level of ego, they have an ego on the floor, but he didn't appear to have an ego off of the floor. And how do we know this? Because people who played with Tim Duncan and played with those Spurs, namely Steven Jackson and others, will tell you Tim Duncan used to get lambasted in practice and in film sessions consistently by Coach Pop. And he didn't let it get to him, because everybody knew that if Coach Pop could go at the star, then they could go with them, and they had to fall in line. It was kind of like Belichick and Brady, right? Belichick consistently tearing into Tom Brady in film sessions and in practice, because why? If you could do it to Tom Brady, arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, then the 53rd man on the roster knows he can get it too, and he's got to fall in line. And so Tim Duncan allowed that for all those years. Do we really believe, you LeBron fans who say LeBron never had a great coach, do we honestly believe that LeBron would ever let any coach treat him in that fashion? Let's be honest here. This is not a shot at LeBron, but what would he do if a coach tried to really dig in him and take it to him in the film session or in practice or what have you? And no player is that great that they're beyond reproach. They will all make mistakes, et cetera, et cetera. But LeBron would have that coach out of there faster than you could blink. He'd get him fired. Tim Duncan never did that, right? He had his 19-year run with Coach Pop where they dominated, like I told you, 71% winning percentage, 5 championships, 6 trips to the finals, right? And so he never did that. And so all of these things here are legitimate arguments as to how do we keep ignoring Tim Duncan? Again, I kind of know because he didn't make a lot of noise. He didn't look for a lot of attention. The mainstream sports media thus didn't talk about him as much. San Antonio is not an exciting media market. Not to say Cleveland is, but obviously LeBron James is a mercurial talent. And so he brought that media attention. But at the end of the day, all this winning Tim Duncan did, and he did it quietly. And then he just walked away quietly. He didn't ask for all this attention and blah, blah, blah. Now, I get it. Everyone, like I said earlier, has a different personality. But Tim Duncan, and again, I really have to reassess where I have this guy on my all-time list. Oh, and here's another one. We talk about the winning. And this is so key because one of the things I often bring up is how somehow LeBron James consistently gets excused from the losing, despite the fact that he's had more control over his rosters than any player ever. But he consistently gets excused from the losing. Yes, he has 4 championships, but yes, he's also lost 6 times in the finals, which is more than any other MVP in history. I'm not making that up. That is what that is. Now, when you look at a Tim Duncan and the Spurs, right? And this guy walks into the league, and other than the lockout shortened season in 99, 50 plus wins every season. That has to mean something. I'm going to leave it there, man. I'm going to leave it there. But I'm going to say there is a legitimate argument that Tim Duncan is not only as good as LeBron, but that he's better. You can feel how you want to feel about that. You can get mad. I know a lot of you will, but it is what it is. Anyway, leave your comments in the comment section. Can't wait to hear from you on that. And remember, check me out. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like. And we'll be doing another live show next Saturday night. And enjoy your Easter. And I'm out. Peace.